General Hospital spoilers reveal that Maurice Benard, the legendary actor behind the iconic role of Sonny on General Hospital, has sent shockwaves through the soap opera community with his latest revelation. He is exhausted. Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally drained after spending decades embodying one of daytime television's most complex, volatile, and emotionally tortured characters. In recent discussions, including candid moments on his mental health-focused podcast State of Mind, Maurice admitted that the weight of playing Sonny for so many years has begun to take a toll on him in ways even he hadn't anticipated. But what once may have sounded like a passing confession is now spiraling into something much larger, an erupting storm of speculation and internal industry conversations that suggest a seismic shift could be coming. One of General Hospital's most enduring pillars might be preparing to step away, and it's a possibility that's igniting both fear and fascination across the fandom. This isn't merely a matter of fatigue. Maurice's exhaustion is not just the result of long filming days or memorizing scripts. It's the culmination of years of diving into the psychology of a man haunted by trauma, consumed by violence, and endlessly torn between love and power. Sonny isn't just a character, he's a psychological marathon. To embody that level of emotional volatility for decades, to revisit the darkest corners of human behavior daily while simultaneously managing one's real-life mental health, is nothing short of Herculean. Maurice has long been vocal about his own struggles with bipolar disorder, using Sonny as both a vessel of artistic expression and, at times, a mirror for his internal battles. But that connection, once therapeutic, is now beginning to feel like a trap. The line between character and self has grown too thin, and the emotional labor it takes to keep Sonny alive on screen is now coming at a cost. What's making this moment even more explosive is the timing. Behind the scenes, General Hospital is undergoing significant narrative restructuring. New story arcs, dramatic shifts in legacy characters, and rising tension among longtime cast members have created an atmosphere of unpredictability. And now, as Maurice voices his truth, it has become impossible to ignore the very real possibility that Sonny could be written out, or phased out, in the near future. Some insiders suggest that producers are already preparing for potential exit strategies, including a dramatic send-off or even a shocking downfall. One that could allow Maurice to exit while giving the audience an unforgettable climax to Sonny's story. Whether temporary or permanent, these rumored plans are fueling intense speculation and, for many fans, existential dread. This is more than a casting shakeup. Maurice Benard's potential departure symbolizes the end of an era. Sonny isn't just a character on a daytime show, he is the emotional and narrative nucleus of General Hospital. He's been the anti-hero audiences love to hate. The broken man in a suit of armor, the father, the lover, the criminal kingpin, and the deeply human soul beneath it all. Maurice brought him to life with rawness, vulnerability, and fire. To imagine Port Charles without Sonny is to imagine the show without its heartbeat. Yet now, faced with emotional burnout and the increasing pressure of maintaining such an iconic persona, Maurice is standing at a crossroads that no amount of script revisions can fix. What makes this development even more compelling is the shift in tone from Maurice himself. He is no longer masking his weariness behind humor or vague remarks. His recent reflections have been unflinching and honest. He's opened up about the emotional toll of returning to set, of forcing himself into Sonny's psyche day after day, of dealing with behind-the-scenes decisions that don't always align with his values or instincts. The fame, the accolades, the fan devotion, none of it can compensate for the psychological drain he's experiencing. There's a raw, growing truth in his words. He may be ready to let go. And if that happens, it won't just be a storyline adjustment, it will be a cultural moment. Fans are already divided, with some expressing support and empathy for Maurice's well-being, while others spiral into panic at the thought of losing the character who has anchored the series for over 3 decades. The show itself would be forced to evolve, to either pass the torch to a new central figure or risk losing its sense of identity altogether. And perhaps most poignantly, Maurice would face the enormous challenge of rediscovering himself outside of Sonny something he has hinted at with both anxiety and curiosity. The idea that Maurice Benard could retire early from the role that made him a household name is not just a possibility, it is rapidly becoming a probable reality. And the chaos swirling around this revelation, whispers in production meetings, sudden rewrites, nervous energy from co-stars, is proof that the show is already bracing for impact. This is the kind of behind-the-scenes drama that rivals anything seen on screen. It's not just a contract negotiation or a creative disagreement. It's the potential collapse of a legacy. Driven not by scandal or ratings, but by human limitation. In the end, Maurice's confession is about more than one actor's fatigue. It's about the cost of carrying a role that becomes a second skin. It's about the weight of expectation, the demand for emotional intensity, and the unseen toll of performing pain every day for the sake of entertainment. It's about a man staring down burnout and realizing that no amount of applause is worth his peace of mind. And as this internal storm continues to build, one truth becomes undeniable. If Maurice Benard walks away from Sonny, it will not be in shame or failure. It will be in power, reclaiming control over his mind, his career, and his future. And that, more than any scripted scene, may be his most courageous act yet. The war between Sonny and Sidwell has pushed Port Charles to the edge of collapse, but no one has been more deeply affected than Sonny himself. What began as another calculated conflict, another threat to his empire, another enemy to crush, has spiraled into something far darker, far more personal, and far more devastating. Sidwell didn't just challenge Sonny's territory. He invaded his soul, exposed fractures that had long been buried beneath years of hardened loyalty and violence, and turned every weapon Sonny once used into a reflection of his own unraveling. Now, with the battle nearing its final act, Sonny stands victorious, but barely. Not triumphant. Not whole. What remains is a man worn down by decades of war, of blood, of betrayal, and most of all, by the weight of having survived it all. And this time, it may truly be the end. There is something chilling about the way the final days of the war have unfolded. Sonny is still a presence to be feared, still commands attention when he enters a room. But the cracks are now visible to everyone. His hands tremble slightly when no one is looking. His voice carries hesitation where once there was command. And his eyes, once sharp, calculating, always ahead of the game, have become distant, haunted. He's no longer fighting for power or control. He's fighting because it's the only thing left that feels familiar. And that kind of battle doesn't lead to victory. It leads to self-destruction. Sidwell wasn't like the others. He didn't come to Sonny with brute force or foolish threats. He came with calculation. With a strategy to dismantle Sonny from the inside out. He attacked Sonny's alliances. Turned trusted lieutenants into double agents. Exploited old rivalries and resurrected past traumas. He didn't just go after Sonny's business. He went after his mind. And for the first time in years, Sonny didn't have a counter move. Every decision he made felt like it came too late. Every step forward left something else burning behind him. By the time he realized what was happening, the damage had already been done. But what truly broke him wasn't Sidwell's tactics. It was the realization that the war itself had consumed everything. The people Sonny fought for, his family, his loved ones, the fragile peace he once vowed to protect, were no longer within reach. He saw it in the way Carly looked at him, no longer with fire, but with worry. In the way Michael refused to take his calls. In the way Dante hesitated before answering any question that involved him. Even Ava, who once shared in the chaos of Sonny's world, now kept her distance, speaking to him like a ghost of who he used to be. And yet, Sonny kept going. He told himself that ending Sidwell was the only way to reclaim what he lost. That once the threat was gone, the people he loved would return. That the silence in his home, the distance in his relationships, the pain in his chest, would all vanish. But it was a lie. A beautiful, desperate lie he needed to believe. Because the truth was too heavy. The fight had changed him forever. As the final strike against Sidwell approached, Sonny prepared not just as a mob boss, but as a man ready to bury a part of himself. He didn't sleep the night before. He sat in the warehouse office alone, surrounded by old photographs and dusty ledgers, staring at the walls that had once felt like power and now felt like prison bars. He replayed every move Sidwell made. Every loss. Every betrayal. Every mistake. And beneath all of it, he asked himself the question he had avoided for years: was any of it worth it? When the moment came, and Sidwell was finally cornered, outmaneuvered, exposed, and unarmed, Sonny didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel relief. He looked at the man who had tried to destroy him and saw a reflection of what he had become, a survivor built on ashes. He gave the order not with rage, but with resignation. And as the gunfire echoed and the final piece of the war ended, Sonny didn't stand taller. He sank deeper. Because with Sidwell gone, there was no more enemy to fight, only the silence of what was left. That silence followed him. Into his penthouse. Into his empty bed. Into the meetings he no longer called. The streets he no longer walked, the eyes of allies who no longer recognized their leader. And in that stillness, a thought took root. A terrifying, liberating thought. It was time to let go. For years, Sonny had been the center of Port Charles, its shadow, its protector, its judge and executioner. But now he was something else entirely, a man stripped of illusion. And what emerged from that clarity was a desire he had never allowed himself to entertain. He wanted peace. Not the kind negotiated with blood and threats. The real kind. The kind that came from walking away before the last piece of himself vanished. The news spread quickly, first in whispers, then in certainty. Sonny was preparing to leave. Not for another war. Not for another secret mission or undercover operation. For good. He began severing ties. Liquidating assets. Transferring power not to one heir, but to a committee of trusted allies who could maintain balance without falling into the same traps he had. He visited the people who mattered. Said what needed to be said. Apologized where he could. Stayed silent where he knew words were no longer enough. Some begged him to reconsider. Others offered him new enemies to fight, new reasons to stay. But Sonny had already made his decision. He didn't want to be the last man standing. He didn't want to die behind a desk or in a hail of bullets. He wanted to leave while he still had something human left inside him. While he could still feel the sun on his skin without wondering who was watching. While he could still look in the mirror and remember who he was before he became what everyone needed him to be. And so, he planned his exit, not as a final act of drama, but as a quiet reclamation of self. He wrote a letter. Just one. To the person he knew would understand, Jason. In it, he explained everything. The toll. The fear. The emptiness. The hope that maybe, just maybe, walking away wasn't defeat but salvation. He left it sealed, knowing that one day, it would be read not with judgment, but with love. The last morning in Port Charles was quiet. Sonny walked through the city as if seeing it for the first time. The docks. The coffee warehouse. The streets where he once ruled with fire and fury. He didn't say goodbye to everyone. He didn't need to. Some things didn't need words. They needed endings. When he boarded the plane, alone. Dressed not in black but in gray, the town felt it. Not with fanfare. Not with headlines. But with absence. The kind that settles into bones. The kind that can't be replaced. And just like that, Sonny was gone. But the echoes remained. In every corner of Port Charles. In every decision made in his absence. In every quiet night when someone remembered the man who once carried a city on his shoulders and finally chose to lay it down. The obsession wasn't with power anymore. It was with freedom. And Sonny, broken, haunted, victorious, had finally claimed it. And in doing so, he became something he never thought possible. Free. As Sonny stepped away from Port Charles, leaving behind decades of power, fear, and loyalty, a new chapter began to write itself, not with his hands, but with the lives of those he left behind. With the legendary figure now gone, a vacuum opened in the very structure of the city's underworld and emotional core, and from within that void emerged two names, Michael and Jason. The two men, bound by blood, loyalty, betrayal, and ultimately reconciliation, were now facing the unimaginable truth. They were the ones left to carry forward the legacy Sonny built. Not just the territory or the business, but the weight, the burden, the name. The crown had fallen, and now it was theirs to either inherit or dismantle. Michael, once torn between the corporate world and moral clarity, had spent years trying to distance himself from Sonny's shadow. But distance couldn't erase blood, and pain couldn't erase instinct. As the man who had watched Sonny both raise him and hurt him, Michael had long wrestled with how to define that legacy. Yet now, in Sonny's absence, something inside him changed. What began as bitterness matured into understanding. Michael knew what Port Charles would look like without someone to maintain order, even if that order was rooted in fear. He saw the predators already circling. He saw the holes forming in old alliances. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that leadership wasn't a choice anymore, it was survival. Not just for himself, but for the family name, the city, and for Sonny's memory. Then there was Jason, the unspoken heir. Always loyal, always in the shadows, the man who had never craved power but had always protected it. Jason didn't need to speak to be feared. He didn't need to rule with force, because his presence alone was enough to command respect. But Jason was also wounded. His years in captivity, the trauma, the absence, the betrayals he couldn't prevent, they had left scars deeper than any physical wound. Still, if there was anyone capable of rebuilding what Sonny had left behind, it was Jason. He didn't want the empire, but he would take it, not for ambition, but for duty. And so, Michael and Jason, two men who had walked separate paths for so long, began to converge. Slowly at first. But even as they built this new alliance, there was something darker looming beyond their decisions, something more personal, more painful, more permanent. Maurice, the man who gave Sonny his soul, was facing his own battle. Behind the cameras, beyond the scripts, a real-life struggle was unfolding. Maurice's health was no longer just a concern whispered behind set walls, it had become a looming shadow that everyone involved in General Hospital could feel. Reports of his deepening mental fatigue, his intensifying episodes of anxiety, and the toll of long-term emotional labor were no longer rumors. They were reality. The character of Sonny had become too close, too heavy, too demanding for a man who had spent years giving every inch of himself to make him real. Maurice had always been open about his bipolar disorder, about his journey with mental health, about the strength it took to show vulnerability. But now, the symptoms were no longer confined to isolated moments. They were persistent. The exhaustion in his eyes during interviews, the silence between lines on set, the way he no longer walked into a room with the same fire. All signs pointed to something serious. And quietly, fans began preparing for what they once refused to accept: Maurice might not return. Sonny, in every sense, might truly be gone. This shift created a ripple not only in storytelling but in the hearts of millions. For generations, Sonny was General Hospital. Through love stories, betrayals, shootouts, and courtroom drama, he was always the constant. The force of gravity that kept the show grounded in emotional intensity. Now, with Maurice's health in question, and Sonny's story reaching its natural end, fans began grieving in real time. Social media filled with tributes, old scene clips, and messages of support. Not just for the character, but for the man who carried him for decades. Back in the world of the story, Michael and Jason's path was becoming clearer. Jason began taking control of operations, but with new boundaries. No more bloodshed for the sake of fear, no more war without cause. Michael brought in his business acumen, creating legitimate fronts, securing assets legally, turning the empire into something sustainable and less volatile. But beneath their newfound balance lay the reality that they were standing on ashes. Sonny's shadow lingered in every meeting, in every decision. Sometimes, Michael would glance at the office Sonny once used and imagine him sitting there. Sometimes, Jason would hear Sonny's voice in his head, offering advice or warning. The grief never fully went away. It simply reshaped itself into purpose. But that purpose came with a cost. Both men began to realize that legacy was not glory, it was responsibility. It was pain passed down like inheritance. It was the heavy silence of knowing that power isolates, that leadership corrodes. That every decision they made would either uphold Sonny's name or tarnish it. The difference now was, they had each other. They weren't repeating Sonny's story. They were rewriting it. And still, beyond the scenes, Maurice's presence loomed large. As updates on his health remained vague, and as producers began shifting long-term arcs to focus on new central figures, one truth became undeniable: the audience was losing a living legend. Not in scandal, not in shame, but in slow, dignified retreat. Maurice had given his soul to Sonny. Now, he needed to reclaim it. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that even legends have limits. That strength is not just about staying, but knowing when to walk away. Michael and Jason now stand as symbols of that transition, not just of power, but of generational change. They are the proof that legacies don't die when their creators leave. They evolve. They adapt. They endure. And as they rise to lead a city built on Sonny's bones, they do so not in his image, but in his honor. What fans are witnessing now isn't just the evolution of a storyline. It's the emotional evolution of General Hospital itself. The closing of a chapter that has lasted decades. And the birth of something new, something rooted in pain, redemption, and the quiet strength of men who never asked to lead but now must. As Port Charles braces for a future without Sonny, and as Maurice bravely confronts his own limits, one thing remains certain. The legacy will continue. Not in mimicry, but in memory. Not in power, but in purpose. And for Michael and Jason, the road ahead is no longer about protecting Sonny's empire. It's about becoming the kind of men who don't need an empire to matter. The torch has been passed, not with triumph, but with love. And in that handoff, a new obsession is born. Not with violence. Not with fear. But with healing. With evolution. With legacy that finally breathes.